and welcome to Leaders in Learning, a series that explores the business of learning, trends, challenges, best practices, hot takes, and everything in between. All things learning are up for discussion. I'm your host, Samantha Murray. Thanks so much for tuning in. In this episode, we'll hit on some pretty big topics that are top of mind for learning leaders today. Scaling, proving business impact, and everyone's favorite topic these days, AI. And we've got the perfect guest lined up to help us tackle these topics. Taggart McCurdy is a former football coach at UC Berkeley, co-founded a learning agency building world-class technical training, and is a true learning champion within his community and organization. If there's one brain you want to pick on the subject of data, AI, and learning, it's his. So let's dive in. Hi Tag, how's it going?
Great, Sam, good to see you again.
I would like to kick things off by having you share a little bit about your journey. You've had a pretty varied background, right? From coaching football all the way now to working at Databricks. So I'd love for you to just share a little bit about that journey.
This may sound a little bit foolish, but learning is learning and teaching is teaching, right? So coaching football was a very interesting learning experience. While I was there, I got my master's in education because I was a coach and teaching.
Right.
Football is just a different subject, right? It was an enlightening experience because you get a bunch of young kids from high school and you're teaching very complex strategies and plays and topics. And you need to be able to explain complex and vivid topics in a vivid way. I kind of learned how to teach at Cal, and then when probably some coaches get fired, that's what happens, but that's part of the journey. I started working in the public sector, found a company called Americana, started by the Gargenta brothers, and it was transferring that skill set to the real world. In college football, you're teaching, right? You're part of the product on the field, you're recruiting, wearing all these hats that are very similar in the startup world, which is what Americana was. So that became my home for roughly 3 months. And then they got acquired by Twitter to run Twitter University internally. And they gave us the opportunity, very graciously, to start our own business. They had a book of business, they had course content, labs, all that stuff, and most importantly, a client list. All we had to do was find a little bit of seeding to begin a new company, so we started New Circle. Shortly after that, I was introduced to Databricks from one of my instructors who was teaching Hadoop at the time and left to go study something called Spark, right? And then work for Databricks, which was, the founders created Spark. And I became an authorized training partner for Databricks shortly thereafter. We sold the company in 2017, and then Databricks invited me to work there, and I've been there ever since. So it's almost 7 years as of next month.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about the transition for you into customer education from the agency that you were running before on the technical training side. Was that an easy transition? Do you find that the skills that you acquired over the course of your previous career was transferable and allowed you to sort of step into that pretty seamlessly?
Yeah, it was a pretty seamless transition. Back in the day, it was mostly instructor-led training, ILTs, which was our bread and butter at the company that I ran. So live instruction, hands-on, really, like the best way to learn really is with that expert in the room and that guidance and that live Q&A. So it's very, very transferable to Databricks, and that's kind of how we started with the training business there, and we eventually moved into e-learning for customer use and ease and obviously different learning styles.
Right. And so it sounds like you've built the training organization truly at Databricks from the ground up, right? So did you go in there planning for scale, thinking long-term and how you could build systems and processes for that long-term scale? What did that look like?
A caveat here, while I am one of the leaders, I'm not the leader of the Databricks enablement organization, but I certainly had my hand in its growth and its development. So when we came in, it was traditional ILT, but then you need scale, you need growth, right? So that's where e-learning comes into play. It's really, how do we get our content in the hands of more people? That includes mostly customers and some, employees, and then obviously partners. But the scale aspect of it was a little bit tricky, right? I've had an awesome opportunity here to learn from other leaders. So right now the leader is Rochna Golani. She comes from AWS and GCP.
Awesome.
And she knows all about scale, and we're learning a lot.
So what are some best practices? If you were speaking to an organization that was just, setting up their first ever enablement or customer education program, what are some of the things that you would recommend they consider or think about as they're setting up their programs so that they can scale longer term?
A lot of the times, and it's kind of baked into the question, is think about the future. One of the interesting aspects of working at Databricks is we're a data and AI company. And when we first started out, we weren't really concerned with the data structure of our learning data, right? Course completions, what the data mapping was, and if we transferred from one LMS to another, like what would that look like, and how would it be reported? As we scale, because the data is important, you need to start to measure impact and outcomes. And if you don't have that data, at least begin to plan for that data and measure and know what impacts you want to measure, then it's really a difficult journey. And that's what I would have done over again if I had known.
Right. I love that. It's like start with the outcome in mind, like figure out whatever business objective is going to be most impactful that you feel like you can impact on, and backwards design from that point, right? Essentially.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So it sounds like your programs have grown from, maybe being a little more focused on customers to now focused on partners, internal technical teams. Audiences grow. I think that's pretty common, right? As a SaaS organization grows, audiences tend to grow as well. So what things have you implemented in your programs to ensure that you can still, personalize the experience for the audience, while at the same time reducing any potential inefficiencies, right? Duplication of effort, silos that tend to happen within the organization?
We've had a bit of a journey ourselves, but at the end of the day, what it comes down to is you want to be able to train everybody the same. There's no difference to us when it comes to employees, customers, and partners. We want to make sure they're all consuming the same content, we're measuring the same outcomes, the same impact. So that's the primary focus of our organization now, and then the downstream effects of that obviously are like the efficiencies. So when you talk about curriculum development, we're eliminating silos, right? We're trying to make sure that the salespeople internally learn the same as our partner salespeople, and that there's not two separate teams curating different content and having different outcomes that may impact something else.
And that's so important because I think, again, with the typical growth that happens, especially with software as a service organizations, it snowballs, right? You have like one team focused on one thing, heads down. I have a goal, I have an objective in mind, I have my audience, and then another team pops up, somewhere else within the organization. They're building very similar content for a slightly different audience. So I think it's really important to consider curriculum development and content development, like building from one source of truth, but then figuring out how you're going to distribute and still personalize the experience. So I'm curious to just get your take on how do you still, if you're going to be developing content and curriculum from that one source, how do you still personalize the experience for the learner to ensure that it's resonating, that it's meeting their specific objective?
It really comes down to, you've got audiences, right? You need to be able to meet people where they are. Customers and employees are one thing. You can mandate, whatever required state law, federal law training there. Customers will pay for training, they'll send their employees there. Partners are very different. The customer comes first. Everything is billable. They need to make sure their resources are off the bench and in the game. Therefore, we've got to meet them where they are. So there's different ways to teach different folks, but when it comes down to the individuals, how do they actually learn themselves? Are they visual learners? Do they need hands-on? Is e-learning a viable solution, right? In some areas it is, and for some folks it is, but for a lot it's not. And then how are you able to take those different modalities and maybe blend them into an offering that can really service most people, but provide that catered, personalized experience that they need?
I think there's probably a technological component to this too, right? The technology that you're using to deliver the training can make or break your ability to personalize. So talk me through any best practices around the technology that you've used over the course of your career that have helped you be able to continue personalizing for the various audiences that you serve.
There's a couple solutions out there that are actually pretty good at this, but most organizations, I would say, would use a hodgepodge of different solutions, right? So they'd use on-demand labs or some sort of lab service or Zoom or inject a live instructor in there and then have like a Slack channel for live Q&A. Depending on how large the class is, it was supported by TAs. So there's different ways to get to the same personalized end goal,
right.
But using different tools to blend all these aspects of learning together. There's a couple of good solutions out there, but traditionally we've used a blended approach of different technologies to serve the end user.
Got it. And I remember from the conversation that we had in San Francisco, actually, at our customer meetup, when we were talking about technology consolidation, I think there's an element to this whereby with the growth of an organization, there comes a point in time where it likely makes sense for you to start consolidating tools and looking at streamlining some of the ways that you deliver training to these various audiences. Have you found that there's like a trigger point that makes sense for organizations to consider that consolidation?
I think it's the scale. So when you get to a certain point, you're trying to bring together the different types of audiences into one platform or tool, which is what happened at Databricks, right?
Right.
We had various learning tools, LMSs, if you will. I think we had at the time 4. And in order to meet the needs of the end user and also to my earlier point about data, measure everybody the same and measure the impact the same, we had to consolidate on one platform that can, A, do all these things with the same material, the same data sets, but B, give the end users a personalized experience. There's certain things that our customers can't see that we see internally, and certainly we don't want our partners to see. So being able to provide those unique experiences for different audiences on one platform is very important.
I want to talk learning program profitability for a second with you, because from my understanding, you've been able to achieve profitability with your learning program. I think a lot of organizations tend to assume that when we talk profitability, we mean monetization of learning programs, but that's not always the case. I think you can achieve learning program profitability by increasing customer LTV, product adoption, upsells, and all that good stuff. So what would you recommend to an organization that was considering moving from being a cost center to being more of a profit center for their organization? What are some of the tips that you would recommend?
If I translate the question correctly, if I'm a learning organization, I want to move from a cost center to a profit center, so I'm not a drag on the company.
Exactly.
You know, I think the education business has great margins, right? Depending on what SKUs you're selling. ILT, instructor-led training, and basically the selling a seat model is very good for business. Other businesses definitely have maybe, hey, we'll sell you a class and you can fill it up with up to 20 people or whatever it may be, right? I think that when you do that, you've got to consider varying aspects, right? When it comes to what we're going to sell, you have to be able to meet the learner's objectives. So there's got to be some sort of knowledge transfer. And then if you're going to say that we're going to aim for profitability versus hey, we're a budget, right? Like any business, how do you scale it? How do you forecast training sales, training revenue, right? 2 different things. What SKUs you're going to invest in. I think the easiest thing to do is build curriculum content and send a professional out to teach a bunch of people. Now, if I'm going to package e-learning together and then sell it to a bunch of folks, how much is that going to cost, or what competition's out there? You've got all these different platforms, sell basically competing products, or at least training on very similar things, unless obviously you have like IP in your tech stack. But there's another aspect of this that's above and beyond profitability for the training organization, is profitability for the company overall, which is, Databricks is in a consumption business. We find that education is very key to getting and attracting end users. And as the product becomes simpler and simpler, our job becomes easier and easier. We want to make sure that the end users that have access to the platform, have access to easy tools, understand the different varying components by role that's accessing the platform, and can consume the platform in very successful ways, basically complete the tasks that they're looking to do. Now, this could point back to documentation, it could point back to role-based learning, and they might achieve this end goal from ILT or e-learning or whatever. But the idea that end users are attracted, or you can increase consumption with one individual via learning, or attract more individuals by learning, is very, very true.
Totally.
Yep.
That's such a beautiful way of summarizing really the goal or the objective of customer education, right? It's not just about the training itself. How are we impacting that customer's ability to do the job? They have a job to be done at the end of the day. They're trying to accomplish a task with the software that we're providing them. So how do we unlock that capability for them at scale and quickly move them from point A to B, right? So that we can increase the impact on the business. So let's talk business impact. So in order to prove that learning is having an impact on the business, you obviously need data to do that. And as we all know, in the customer education space, that's really hard to do. Data architectures are complex. It can be spread across multiple systems, as you talked about, 4 different LMSs. What are some best practices that you have to share for organizations that are looking to really measure and prove out the impact that their learning programs are having on business objectives?
Great question. I think that there's an obvious answer here when it comes to cohorts. And I mean cohorts by product cohorts. New users that are on your platform in any given month, and then what the attrition rate is through the remainder of the year. I think, usually over a course of 12 months, an initial cohort will have somewhere in between 10 and 20% remaining. If you have a good learning enablement program that initiates contact with the cohort upon access to the platform, you can retain more users. You can make them successful at their job. And if you make them successful at their job, you're going to continue to drive impact moving forward.
Yeah, it's that stickiness, right?
Yep.
How do you actually measure that impact on that learner? What are some of the common KPIs that organizations should be thinking about when they're developing their programs?
Course completion is one. Some people don't think of it that way because they're traditional ILT users, but e-learning definitely has some drawbacks when it comes to, I think e-learning completion is in the single digits, generally speaking, and you have to chop it up and make it very consumable in order to continuously drive and motivate and attract the end user. So course completion is definitely one. Certifications is another. When you certify someone, you basically traditionally provide a course that has a broad application to your product, whatever it may be. You could have different product lines, and it's just broadly, do you know what is happening here? And you get a certification or whatever. Another impact is measuring learning transfer, knowledge transfer.
It's a good one.
So there's this concept of certification. Okay, you understand our platform. Now, if I give you an assessment that's maybe a performance-based assessment for the audience, that means hands-on, to measure a real-world use case on top of what you've learned from the certification. And that measurement there, like the positive outcome, the true false, when you send the report in, is very impactful. Do end users know how to do streaming? Do end users know how to do ETL? Do they know how to do a Hadoop migration? Those are things that we can measure with performance-based training and assessments.
Have you been able to also effectively measure the impact of your learning programs against things like churn and customer lifetime value and adoption of the products that are being sold to the end users?
We, very early on, we took measurements of customer churn. And I believe there was a correlation, I wouldn't say causal, but definitely a correlation between learning enablement and whether the customer churned or not. I had to sell training to my sellers internally, and this is one of the tactics I use is, hey, you have a customer and you want to retain them long term and get the next renewal on the contract. Well, you better teach them how to use the product, right, everybody. So yeah, there's definitely a correlation there that we've measured in the past. I think we continue to measure it now, but it's more about certifications and services assessments, like I mentioned.
Got it. So switching gears, I want to talk technology with you for a little bit, because you've been sitting at the intersection really over the course of your career, right between technology and education. So I'm curious to get your take. What's your perception on the impact that technology has had on the learning industry?
The impact I think that it had, it's not quite to where I think it will be in the next month to couple of months to years. Technology, and I'll just use the word AI, right, is a very powerful and beneficial thing to the learning community. I think that when you talk about scale earlier, how do you scale training to the end users? That's pretty obvious now that you have chatbots that, when asked or prompted a question, can return a very valuable answer that a TA might have been able to do.
Right.
So now you've got automated support. You can run massive, ILT sessions. You can have a huge impact on e-learning, which I mentioned earlier had single-digit completion rates. Well, what if you had a chatbot that would nudge you or provide you with real-time answers? That's as good as a SME.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into AI, because I think there's some apprehensions in the learning community, right, around the content that's being created, especially on the content creation side with AI. There's a lot of complications, I think, or things to consider when you're thinking about leveraging AI to build content. What's your take on that? Like, with your background and having been in the AI space at Databricks, what's your take? What should organizations be thinking about?
There's no algorithm that's going to make up for bad data. So if you have a bias and that's the data that you're relying on, then that's what's going to be reflected in the tool that you're using. Right. AI is just a tool. It's a very powerful one. It's something that we can use to scale, and something that we can really provide real-time support 24/7 to end learners around the world. But it's all about what the data set is, right? And I don't think that we should be too concerned with all the AI talk around Skynet and the Terminator and all that. We should be focused more on, hey, this is actually a very powerful, good thing for humanity. I do believe in the communal aspect of AI, in the sense that it should be in the hands of everybody, because AI in the hands of you just maybe individuals or corporations, that's where you probably run into a little bit more bias
totally.
and issues.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, you need, to your point, right? You need the data from a larger source in order for the AI to actually get trained correctly and to reduce some of that bias. So to your point, I think one of the things I've noticed is like AI is still a little bit for the few, right? There are still very few companies that are leveraging AI. I think there's still that apprehension. What do you think is needed, both from a technological perspective as well as from like an organizational change management perspective, to overcome the barrier so that more and more organizations start to adopt AI?
It's actually the objective of Databricks, is to democratize AI. Previously had been Microsoft, Google, Apple that have been able to leverage this for their benefit only. Meanwhile, everybody else is working on traditional data warehouses, which that's 40-year-old technology. How do we predict the future? How do we predict behavior? Super, super important for most people to have, most companies to have. And I think that that's a valuable thing for any business and any institution to be able to leverage.
What are some of the risks and pitfalls that you would anticipate that organizations should be considering if they were thinking of leveraging AI for either content creation or attempting to personalize that experience for the end learner? What are some of the things that organizations really need to be considering to make sure that they reduce that bias?
I think reducing the bias is very important. I think that another thing that is very, very important that most people miss is consent. Getting the end user's consent to be able to
use the data,
process their data, use it in the appropriate, ethical way, and provide them with that experience. That's an opt-in only, in our opinion, but that's a very, very kind of overlooked important thing. And in my mind, really the only pitfall, I guess, to using AI for learning needs. I think it's all very positive and...
Right, so one of the ways that organizations could potentially overcome that is looking for a tool that might have some sort of control panel or some sort of mechanism by which they give that control to the program leaders so that they can decide how their data is being leveraged.
It definitely involves, unfortunately, lawyers too, right? Which, shucks. To be able to understand what kind of consent we need, what kind of tools that we distribute that consent with. Any tool nowadays, and because it's becoming more and more of an issue, should have a way to notify someone how companies are leveraging and using their data and whether or not they consent. You'd be surprised how infrequently this happens. You have to submit a ticket, and then it's like a process to grade the platform or do some sort of messaging broadly.
Right. And this is a bit of a new world. This is all... think of how much transformation has occurred just in the last 6 months around this space. It's wild. So let's paint the picture of the future for a second, okay? Tesla, and we have autonomous cars here in San Francisco. Let's paint the picture of a future where we actually have autonomous learning, and that's a possible. We have really strong data inputs. Systems are able to create personalized end user experiences for the learner based on the data that it's being fed. How do we get there? From your perspective, with all of your knowledge around AI and data, how do we get there?
That is a great question. I'm not a soothsayer, but maybe we ask AI itself how we possibly get there. But I think that it's, again, I'm always going to defer back to ethically approaching the problem the right way, making sure that we are honoring the individual, the end user. But then again, institutions have to embrace autonomous learning. There is value in being an SME. There is value in being an instructor. I think that will never go away. So a fully automated AI learning experience might become the next version of e-learning if you don't have that kind of human interaction. And then again, you need that knowledge in order to have those correct inputs into the whatever data you're using as a data set to spit out the results that you want.
Do you anticipate instructional designers, there's a future by which potentially that role changes slightly and it's more about the prompt engineering with the AI? Do you anticipate that sort of change? Is that what you see?
Yes, I think that all roles are going to change. I think the instructor role is going to change. I think, to your point, the instructional designer's role is going to change. AI is good at making suggestions. I think we've all learned that with ChatGPT.
Right.
But you're going to have to edit it to some degree because it's not perfect. Now, it'll iterate and get better, but that's because we're going to have those roles that are going to provide that input to the data set to make that, whatever the outcome we're trying to achieve, better and better and better.
How do we ensure that we don't lose the human element with AI, with all of this taking over in a lot of ways some of the traditional roles that have existed in the learning space. How do we couple that human element with AI?
I'm always going to point back to the end user. I don't think that the end user wants to interface solely with a machine to have a learning experience. There's always going to be a question of whether the response you're getting through a pop-up is really, an AI chatbot or a person. And when it comes to the learning experience, I think that, face-to-face, having an interaction and someone understanding the language or the discourse or the point you're trying to make, AI may not be able to quite comprehend, is very, very important, right? There might be language barriers, things like that the machines simply just won't understand.
Thinking about the learning industry and how much it's changed in the last, even just 6 months, but the last few years. What are your predictions for the learning industry and the market at large? Not just from a technology perspective, more generally speaking, the roles that are involved, the processes, the systems that we have in place. What are your predictions for the learning industry?
I think that, and this is where we're trying to go, right, is massive scale. We're going to use AI to drive operational efficiencies on the back end. Companies are making product integrations and innovating faster than ever. People need to learn more and more and faster and sooner. So we've got to be able to have the content stay up to date. How do we do that? I think it's important that we leverage the same tools that engineers are using to speed up the product integration. So we'll definitely do that on the back end. On the front end, we can use the LLMs and AI to massively scale the audience. One instructor can teach thousands of people with the ability to use TAs, if you will, as chatbots. Blended learning is the future. I think that the interaction with an instructor, content material that I can take at my own pace. Instead of sitting down for 4 straight days or going through a boot camp where we used to teach Android boot camps and it was 5 days long, 8 hours a day.
Right.
Well, I think now with AI and LLMs, we can chop that up into a boot camp style where it's, hey, maybe it's 12 weeks and the human touch points are peppered in between, right? They're very valuable and they attract to the end user. They get the learner to interact with the product a little bit more. But having that the ability to spread it out and attract more users and scale.
I love that too, because it continues alongside the addition of AI into our workflows in the learning space. There's still that need for a human interaction, that human element to it, to give, especially around social learning and community, when we think about the need for us to interact and learn from peers, the coaching, the mentoring, the benefit that we gain from that human interaction cannot be overlooked or overstated. What about embedded learning experiences? What's your take on learning in the flow of work and how that might take over? Because as organizations are becoming more globally distributed, remote workforce, there is this need for learners to be able to access content in the moment of need. How do you see that transforming the learning industry?
I think for the most part, it's been there for a while. We've seen, Microsoft came with that little clippy thing. You open Windows, and it's like, hey, this is how you use this tool. It's just going to be much more effective, right? And I think that's a very valuable thing to do, is learn on the job. Of course, if you're, let's learn to do what you're trying to accomplish with this tool better. Let's drive some outcomes. I think, on-the-job learning is very, very important. I think AI is going to have a massive impact on it because, its ability to create real-life answers with more depth and the ability to ask for more depth progressively as you learn, it's achievable.
And the tracking, right? The data tracking capabilities, you know exactly what your users are doing in the product at any given moment in time, right? Through their experience. And so all of that is information that can be fed into the AI to improve the content that's being created, to improve the output of the chatbot that they're interacting with. So lots of potential there.
Tons of potential, but I'm always going to go back to, make sure you got their consent to do that. Yeah.
That's fair. Tag, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and knowledge with our audience today. We really appreciate the time that you've given us. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, I'm honored. Thank you for having me.
Amazing.